Welcome to Theory of Music, Grade 5, Lesson 1 with Franz Devantier. In this lesson, we will revise major and minor scales in the treble and the bass clef. Remember that a major scale consists of tone, tone, half tone, 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 half tone. The terms half tone or semitone are interchangeable. If this information about the major scale is not familiar to you, then it would be best to go back and revise the previous grades or lessons. What we are doing in Theory of Music is cumulative. You need to make sure that you are familiar with everything from grade 1 through to grade 4 before attempting grade 5. You will remember that a harmonic minor scale consists of tone, half tone, 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 half tone, minor third, half tone. The 7th degree of the scale is raised in a harmonic minor. Remember that a harmonic minor goes up and down in the same way. Below we have an illustration of the harmonic minor, ascending 1 octave, treble clef and bass clef. The relative major is C major of this A minor harmonic scale. So the 7th degree of this scale is the G, which has become a G sharp, leaving a minor third between the F to the G sharp, and there's your semitone from the G sharp to the A. Remember, minor scales are not perfect scales, and there's 2 compromises to get the scale to sound not like a modal scale. And the one compromise is the harmonic theory. So this is the harmonic minor, the first way of compromising the scale to get it to fit into the diatonic scale theme. You'll remember how a melodic minor is a little bit different to the harmonic minor. In the melodic minor, the 6th and the 7th degrees of the scale are raised on the way up, and they lowered again on the way down. Now this prevents us from having a minor third in the scale. So this is in fact the 2nd compromise, the melodic minor. And as we look at the scale below in the example, treble clef and bass clef, relative major, C major, we see that we've raised the 6th and the 7th degrees of the scale. In other words, F has become F sharp, G has become G sharp, and on the way down, they've become G natural and F natural again. Now the structure of a melodic minor is going up. In A minor, for example, we have our first tone between A and B, a half tone between B and C. There's a tone between C and D, a tone between D and E, a tone between E and F sharp, another tone between F sharp and G sharp, and then a half tone or a semitone between G sharp and A. Coming down in A minor, we go from A to G, and that's a tone. G to F is a tone. F to E is a half tone, which we didn't have on the way up. We've now got a half tone in that position. E to D is a tone. D to C is a tone. C to B is a half tone. That remains the same up and down, that half tone. And finally, B to A is a tone. The melodic minor avoids the problem of the minor third that the harmonic minor scale has. But by so doing, the scale is different on the way up and the way down. So neither the harmonic minor nor the melodic minor is a perfect minor scale. We do, however, except the harmonic minor and the melodic minor, and we use them in diatonic music. If we were to play the scale of A minor, in other words, in the key of the relative major, which in this case is C major, without any accidentals, then we get the natural minor or the Aeolian modal scale. And here's an example in the treble and the bass clef of the Aeolian modal scale or the natural minor. So obviously the natural minor is built on the relative major scale, in the key of the relative major scale, and it doesn't have the seventh raised or the sixth and seventh raised on the way up and lowered again on the way down. And this sounds a little bit different, and one of the reasons for that is we always have between the seventh and the final note of the scale a semitone. That's in diatonic music. But in this Aeolian modal scale, or the natural minor on A, you'll notice we go from G to A, which is a tone, and that makes it sound a little bit different. Now, the modal scales may be outside of the syllabus of some institutions, but then again, others may add them. I certainly do add them, because when we come to composition, and especially modern composition, we are going to be looking at one of the tools in composition is going to be modal scales. Personally, my favorite is the Lydian modal scale, because it's a beautiful scale and it lends itself so beautifully to build jazz harmonies on top of the Lydian modal scale. The easy way to get a Lydian modal scale is in the C key of C major. You just add an F sharp and you have the Lydian modal scale. C, D, E, F sharp, G, A, B, C. There's your Lydian scale. Otherwise, if you had to play the notes from F up to F, now in the key of F you would have had a B flat, but instead of playing a B flat, we play a B natural, then you will get another perfect Lydian scale. We are going to take on the Lydian scales, the modal scales, and other modern ways of harmonics, especially when we get to the harmony side of things, but especially when we get to the composition side of things. Let us look at a few scale examples. In a music theory exam, you could be asked to write ascending, descending, or both, with or without key signatures. In grade 5, they may just ask you for 1 octave, but they may also ask for 2 octaves or 3 octaves. They could ask you in the treble clef, the bass clef, or one of the many other clefs. But for now, we're just focusing on the treble clef and the bass clef, the treble clef being the high clef and the bass clef being the low clef. Below, I've given you an example of C sharp major ascending with key signature. Now, C sharp major is a beautiful scale because it has 7 sharps, and there are 7 notes in the scale before you hit the octave or the 8th note. So every note is a sharp. C sharp major descending with key signature. And if you look at the example below, you see it's pretty much the same. Just start on C, do the scale down to C, C to C, except everything is sharp. Every single note is sharped. Now let's look at a few examples where you would have to write the scale without a key signature. So I have illustrated the treble and the bass clef below, ascending and descending without key signature. So it's just the notes, but you'll notice that every note has a sharp in front of it. C sharp major. What a beautiful scale. Remember that a relative minor scale is a minor third below the tonic note of the major scale. It is formed on the sub-mediant degree of the major scale. Does that make sense? So if you were, the major scale was a scale of C, and then the sub-mediant of C is A, so we find that the minor, the relative minor scale is then A minor, and the A is then a minor third below the tonic note of C. So let us look at the harmonic scale of E flat minor. Now the relative major of E flat minor is G flat major. Now G flat major has got 6 flats. E flat minor ascending and descending with key signature. And if you look at the example below here, you'll notice that this is the harmonic minor scale, and we can tell that because the 7th degree is raised on the way up and the way down. You can see that near the top, that D natural, it would have been D flat, it's now D natural, and that makes it into the harmonic minor scale. Without that D natural, it would have been an Aeolian minor scale or a natural minor scale. E flat harmonic minor ascending in the treble clef and also ascending in the bass clef, but this time with no key signature. And just to keep things simple, we've said 1 octave, but you could have gone 2 or more octaves if you wanted to. So we look at the treble clef, we see from the E flat there all the way to the E flat at the top, there's 6 flats, and you can count the flats starting from the E flat as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up to the C flat. The top E flat would have been repeated, and of course there would have been a D flat, but that's now a D natural, so that we can get the half tone or the semitone between the D natural and the E flat. And in the bass clef, we have 1 octave lower, we have a similar scenario. So that is the harmonic minor. And now we have that same scale, E flat harmonic minor, which is relative to G flat major, with no key signature. And if you look at the examples below, you'll see it is descending, in other words, each note getting lower. And again, we see the raised 7th note. Now let's go to E flat melodic minor, ascending and descending in the treble clef, and ascending and descending in the bass clef. Let's do them both just 1 octave to keep it simple. And we use the key signature. So that's relatively easy. All we do, we put the 6 flats of G flat major in the key signature. From G flat major, we go down a minor third to E flat, and we just write the scale in the key of G flat major from E flat up to E flat and down again. On the way up, we raise the 6th and 7th degrees of the scale. In other words, the C and D become C natural, D natural. So instead of C flat and D flat, they become natural. And on the way down, it becomes D flat and C flat. You raise the 6 and 7 on the way up and lower them again on the way down. And if you look at the example in the bass clef, it's exactly the same. It's just, in this case, it's actually 2 octaves lower. Now let's do that exact same scale, but this time we do it without the key signature, with no key signature. So all we do is we write the notes, and then we put in all the flats. Now the only note that hasn't got a flat, because there's 6 flats, is the F. So the F remains the same, all the other notes get a flat. And we see how we've just made a note that the C and the D are naturals, and on the way down they're flats again. Now let's just look at another example. Let's look at G sharp harmonic minor. Descending and ascending in the treble clef and in the bass clef. I've turned it around this time. Instead of starting at the bottom and ascending and then descending. I said, well, let's descend and then we ascend again. Okay, so G sharp harmonic minor is, the relative major is of course B major, which has 5 sharps. And as we get to the 7th degree of the scale, which would have been F sharp, we need to sharpen that by a half tone or a semitone. And so that becomes F double sharp, which is in fact the enharmonic note of G, then a semitone below G sharp. And if you look carefully, in the example below, you'll see in the treble clef, we have G sharp harmonic minor. In the treble and the bass clef, exactly the same idea. In this case, they're just 2 octaves apart. Now let's look at the G sharp harmonic minor and ascending and descending in the treble clef and the bass clef, but this time with no key signature and only 1 octave, just to keep it simple. So if we start off with a low G below the staff, and we go G to G, and then we put in all the sharps and flats, and we need to raise the 7th degree by a semitone. So we just make that F a double sharp, and we're done. And then in the bass clef, it's exactly the same. I've just done it the other way around. In this example, the treble and the bass clef both start in the same note, and then they move up 1 octave, and the bass clef moves down 2 octaves. So in the middle of this scale, they actually end up 2 octaves apart, and at the end, they end up on the same note again. Now let's just do G sharp melodic minor, ascending and descending in the treble and the bass clef. And let's start off with the key signature. Now you remember that the 6th and 7th notes are raised on the way up and lowered again on the way down. G sharp melodic minor is relative to B major, which has got 5 sharps in it. And so the only 2 notes that aren't sharped are the B and the F. So the B doesn't change. No, sorry. It's the B it's a B and the E, not the F, my apologies. It's the B and the E don't have a sharp. So the B stays the same, but when we get to the E, we make it a E sharp, which is actually an enharmonic note for F, and F sharp becomes F double sharp, and then on the way down again, it becomes a normal F sharp and a normal E natural on the way down. So we raise the 6th and 7th on the way up and lower them again on the way down. And if you look at the bass clef, it's exactly the same scenario as the treble clef. They're just 1 octave apart, these 2 scales. And now let's just look at the same thing, but this time with no key signature, also 1 octave. So we first just draw the notes of our scale, and then we go in and we put in all the sharps, the 5 sharps of the key signature, and then we just raise the 6th and 7th on the way up and lower them again on the way down. And we get our G sharp melodic minor. Thank you for joining me for Grade 5, Lesson 1 of Theory of Music. In this lesson, we have just revised the major and minor scales in the treble and bass clef. So we haven't actually learned anything new this lesson. We're just revising the scales to make sure that our foundation is sound so we can build on top of that. In Lesson 2 of Grade 5, we will revise the key signatures and maybe just put a different spin onto it just to help us to remember them easier or to memorize them. See you in Lesson 2.